So, Chris Muller, thanks very much for joining me on Hermitix podcast once again. It's been 3 years since we last spoke about Günther Anders, and we're here to speak about Anders once again because of the recent release of The Obsolescence of the Human, which ironically technology is blurring out from my camera. And this is published by the University of Minnesota Press, who were kind enough to send me this copy, so a big thank you to them. And this... as I understand it, so this is volume 1 of 2, and this is basically considered Günther Anders' magnum opus, and you can probably tell from the title what we're going to be talking about, which is Anders on technology and philosophizing on technology, and Promethean shame, which we'll quickly go over at the start, even though we went over it last time because it's so important, but also Phantomization, iconomania, and we're hopefully going to get to the last chapter of the book on the bomb, because not everybody gets there. But there's also, it's just an idiosyncratic, strange, and stylistically peculiar text. It was one of those books where I had to sort of take out a few cogs in my mind of how to approach philosophy and then like start again, because there is, and I mean this in a kind way to Anders, there is a casualness that is very rarely found with something that is also extremely rigorous. And hopefully, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but hopefully we'll get to that. But so this was translated just by yourself, but it's edited by yourself and Christian Dries. So I guess before we jump into Anders' work in this book specifically, Chris, just tell us what's the history and what was this like to translate as well?
Yeah, well, thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to come back and talk about the full translation, I guess. Yeah, it's been a very long journey producing this book. So ironically, the text we talked about last time on Promethean shame, this essay by Anders in which he talks about how technology can make us feel awkward, inferior, uncomfortable in our skin. That was the first translation I did. That was over 10 years ago. And in a sense, this book has been in the works ever since then. Now, you spoke about Anders having a very unique style, which makes it pretty difficult and laborious to translate. We can talk a bit about that. There's the whole, the realities of being an academic and working and trying to juggle lots of differing responsibilities, of finding publishers, finding the right kind of framing and setting. And then luckily about 4 or 5 years ago, things became very concrete and we were able to dig in, and I was really able to start focusing on the production of the book. And now just about the edition. So the first edition, the first German edition, appeared in 1956. And if you already are familiar with Anders, you will know that a lot of his ideas come out of the experience of exile. So they're dated 1940s or something like that. And they're the product of of rewriting, reframing, and in a sense, our edition tried to continue with that process. So wherever we could, we tried to provide, what are the philosophical ideas he's engaging with? What are the quotes? What are the kind of secondary sources that may have been familiar to original readers but aren't now? So that's a bit of the work that went into this.
So this is a place to start, I think, is the style. So you mentioned also him drawing on, references and context that we might not be familiar with, and not just drawing on fairly, well-known philosophers too, but also drawing, so the style seems to reflect this, that he also draws on sort of events and things that he's just going to and things that he's seeing. So you're kind of thrown into the context, I guess, of the 50s. I'm not sure do we know how long it took him to write this?
I think it probably took him most of his working life up to that point to write. In the sense that you can hear echoes of older versions of writing and older versions of himself. A lot of the text is repurposed from earlier texts and serialized. So it's very hard to accurately date the kind of ideas, the concepts.
Okay. So in terms of the style, what springs to mind when reading it is, I don't know if you're familiar with the artist Kurt Schwitters, and No. Okay.
Not.
Oh, well, no, okay. Well, well, that's that gone then. But it's sort of a collage and this strange assemblage where one feels that a lot of, on the surface, disparate textures and forms are put together, but it forms a coherent whole. So on the one hand, reading this was most like reading some sort of strange philosophical diary. That's probably the closest in feeling. But at the same time, it does have the rigor of, say, Heidegger, and it has a seriousness, and it also has a trajectory that's kind of holistic and sort of always coming back upon itself and building up some central core. But he also seems to be walking a tightrope where he doesn't want to give his work over to the thing that he's writing about. So there is this feeling that he wants to imbue it with that maybe doesn't make it immune, but makes it not part of the becoming obsolescent, basically. But I mean, how would you describe the style?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'll have to look up the artist and probably, or I hope I will recognize the style of the images, because actually you've picked up on something that I think is really central to the style. It's kind of visual quality, and it has a very open, I think, relationship to surrealistic painting and strategies of collage, especially caricature, this kind of notion of exaggerating, enlarging something to create a certain affective response, but also a way of seeing the world. And this is something that Anders reflects a lot about in his writings, but also in the text itself. And it really is a scenic kind of work. So we're kind of going from one encounter with a technology to the next, or to kind of an encounter with a philosophical idea, a thinker, a reader, a world event. And these occasions, they build into a bigger kind of philosophical whole. He coins this term occasional philosophy, Gelegenheitsphilosophie. So it could also be translated as opportunistic. Gelegenheit could also be an opportunity, right? So this kind of notion that whenever we encounter with something that is irritating, difficult, makes us stop and think, this could be a starting point for philosophy and could be blown up. That's really where this comes from. And the focus is always on this kind of interaction between, I guess, us as individual human beings going through our lives and a world of technology that is evolving really fast.
And I mean, this is treading previous territory, as I said, so we can be brief on this, but this sort of first encounter of the book, and it is key if someone hasn't listened to the previous episode, is the encounter with the dishwasher, right?
Yeah, I'm always worried that dishwasher is not actually the machine he uses, because it's so firm in and I've used the example so many times. I would have to go and look it up, but yeah, hopefully it is. But it presents itself as a visit to an exhibition of technology, right, in California in 1940s, and it's about household apparatuses, and he goes with a friend. And he observes how his friend hides his hand behind his back, as if he was embarrassed to bring his hands into the company of this machine. Let's stick with the dishwasher, right? That is so good at washing dishes and can do it so much better and faster and more efficiently than a human being. And this really kind of absurd opening scene, it is built into this thesis that we're really embarrassed to be human rather than being machines. And he uses this as a contrast to say like, to be capable of this feeling, on some level, our self-image or our body must already experience itself as a malfunctioning device. And to experience this as a flaw, right? Not as some sort of, oh, we're so much better, we're alive and creative and malleable and human. No, we're flawed because we're not as kind of augmentable, perfectable, enhanceable as a technological device.
Yeah. So does Anders say that we have willingly, so there's a split there, which brings us really into Phantomization, which is right up next in the book. So there's a split there between two worlds, right? One of technology, one of the machine, and one that is, because of that world of the machine or technic, is, as per the title, is being rendered obsolescent. As you said, is an error, is not as good, is not going to be as skillful, etc., etc., is not perfect. So have we willingly, consciously created that other world, or is that developed by itself in some way?
Yeah, that's a great and difficult question. I think so. It helps maybe to think about how Anders conceives of technology, right? So he speaks of human beings as naturally artificial beings. So we inhabit technology, we inhabit language, clothing, all sorts of tools and implements, and we have this kind of evolved ability to use technology as if it's part of our own self, right? I can talk right now without having to think and without having to kind of experience that I'm actually using language. But he says, like, with this feeling of Promethean shame, with this kind of being creeped out by some sort of technology, suddenly there's a split. Rather than being experienced as part of ourselves, as some sort of extension of our capacities, technology emerges as a strange separate entity, as a separate device. And there's various ways in which Anders talks about this, but he tends to date it towards the Industrial Revolution and says, like, that's really where once we have something like the machine, the apparatus, and once humans have to somehow change their behavior to keep up with a device, or to kind of integrate themselves into a factory and its working rhythms, that's when suddenly technology is no longer this kind of almost natural organic medium for our lives. It becomes a counterforce and an potentially oppressive force. And this is what he kind of says, we have this Promethean freedom to create things, but it's almost as if this triumph has been too big and we are now embarrassed. The Prometheus in us is too big, as he says, right?
Well, it seems to Anders that it's so big that we now seem to, I don't know if this is conscious again, but we seem to believe that that world, that force of the factory or technology is real. And we exist, everything feels basically not quite real, which his style really gets across. He's kind of floating through this text, as you say, one thing to the next. But what holds weight is, like the human drawn to this thing, and then the human floats away to this thing. But that technology is the thing that is sounds disgusting to say it, but the technology is rooted. We're not. And so we exist in a phantom, unreal world.
I guess that's again, a nice mental image, I think, because we can almost think of the history of technology as kind of a continuous process. This is how Anders narrates it. It becomes more capable, better and better. And of course, just to be clear, this is something that is, the work to do this is done by humans, but what becomes ever more real in the world is an infrastructure of technology and an infrastructure of devices and objects that can do more and more and more. Whereas, of course, we as individual humans are not the product of this kind of cumulative work that is so distributed and extends across time and space. We're only ever just encountering the newest iteration of some previous device. So in comparison to this technological world, and it depends a lot on how this world is designed, we can be made to feel smaller and smaller and smaller, right? That's really what he's saying, is that we've created a world in which our own products can be used to make us feel obsolete, small, redundant. And importantly, he says, in such a world, a lot of our philosophical ideas and a lot of our patterns of thought and how we approach human life, they've become obsolete too, right? Because they're talking about this kind of idealized world in which there's kind of humans in their harmonic kind of state with artifice, but not really this industrialized world.
So I don't know if in terms of the translation there was any sort of discretion around the German term for obsolete. So obsolete, in terms of the definition of that word, be sort of rendered now useless in relation to something that's more. So we are rendered useless in relation to that world. Is that every facet of us, or is it just the facets that we would typically state are the human traits?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great comment, actually, or great intervention to make. So the original German title, which we haven't actually, or I haven't shared yet, is die Antiquiertheit des Menschen. So the German word for obsolete is antiquiert. So it would have been possible and often is translated as antiquatedness or outdatedness or something like that. There's a few reasons why I guess we arrived at obsolescence as the main title. First of all, this is a word that Anders used as adjective throughout the text, obsolete. It is a term that Anders uses later in later texts when kind of summing up what was my earlier work about. Oh, it was about the obsolescence, obsoleteheit of the model of the human that has existed up to now. So this kind of philosophical concept. But I guess the German word antiquiert means something like, antiquated, old, maybe in the notion of an antiquarian, slightly dusty, awkward, outdated, and in a sense, antiquatedness was too awkward a word to actually even convey those. For me, at least, it didn't feel like that was really being conveyed with that title. It's a very unusual word, I think.
Okay.
And but there are these kind of resonances to the term that are being played on at every point, even in the style, right? The style is in itself at times a bit awkward, a bit old, a bit over embellished, right? So this kind of feeling. And, I don't know if that's just me as a translator reading too much into it, but I do think there is a relationship between
He feels
title and
he feels like an old man. It feels like an old man's sort of almost war diary. He's like writing home to someone. Yeah. But no, I was just going to comment that I'm in agreement with you. I mean, it's interesting there that you said the word that antiquated was too awkward, because it's almost like it seems that awkward would be a good word for humans. We don't quite, we're squirmy in relation to technology. But so the big point that a lot of people would make today would be, why don't you just get your phone, which is ruining your life, and either turn it off or get a dumb phone or do something so it doesn't have that effect on you. But Anders is pretty clear when he says lines like, you can't turn off your radios. So we can't turn off this world. We can't just make that decision, the Luddite decision for him.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really where what you called the rigor, or for me, what we might call the rigor of this book comes across, right? So I guess the individual critiques of encounters with technologies and their tendencies, they really speak to us, they're really powerful, and they're easily translating to, I guess, the present. But underpinning this is a much deeper engagement with the question what it means to live in a world in which technological infrastructures that are controlled by other entities, be it an organization, individuals, and so forth, have such a world-shaping capacity that what we might traditionally call our human capacities to take responsibility, make decisions, all these kind of things now happen in that kind of world, right? In a technological world condition. So it doesn't really matter whether you use the phone or not, because that infrastructure exists. Not using the phone is still just one way in which you're inhabiting a world shaped by phones, right? And that might work to your favor or not, but you can't really escape that world, because that world has been built, is real, and in that world, decisions and processes happen in ways that we struggle to intuit as individuals. And the book is kind of almost mapping this world condition for us and moving through different technologies and different emotional registers and different kind of realities.
So our human character, paradoxically begins to develop from this engagement or non-engagement, but non-escapable engagement with the technological infrastructure.
Yeah, we need to learn to live in a world in which there's not only technology, but in which there's also a lot of other people using technology, right? So this is actually one of my favorite scenes when he talks about not using the phone. He's, I think, talking about not listening to radio and not watching television. If you make that decision, it doesn't change the fact that everyone else is doing so, right? And that their mode of engaging with you and their way of seeing you and responding to you will be shaped by their kind of immersion in that technology.
Yeah.
And that's where, what you were saying earlier, that the kind of what we might call the virtual or the world projected and created by something like TV or radio is pragmatically more real than your own lived reality, because you kind of need to translate your life into that framework.
Yeah. So this is what he means by when he says radio and television installations are facts in and of themselves.
Exactly. They're an infrastructure that have certain tendencies that, as they are developed, unfold new qualities, or their power is exploited and sought by people running TV stations. They might develop a new program format to get more viewers, that kind of thing. So the dynamic of this technology will continue to develop and shape the world. And we as individuals need to continually adjust to that world, maybe, buy a new device, develop new tastes, change our habits. So very stark, and this might help people who are not familiar with this particular essay. So Anders writes about television just on the eve of when television is introduced in Germany. And he's kind of almost painting a picture of a future world. What will it take for television to become successful? And he says, well, you'll have to rearrange your living room. You'll have to sever all your social ties because you want to stay in to watch TV and you're no longer going out. And this will take a lot of work, right? This is not something that happens from one day to the next, but we'll do this because it's somehow enjoyable, engaging, and somehow more fun to watch television, right? And he's kind of saying, through this kind of new possibility, these new experiences, the world is transformed in ways that will be really hard for every individual to intuit. But it, of course, is also, if you're running a TV station or an ad agency or you're a politician, this is great for you because you have a new audience. And so this is the kind of way the book is trying to map out the way the world changes.
So behind this seems to be some sort of myth of progress. I mean, this is jumping to the last chapter, which I know you wanted to focus on where we can. And so it seemed, the question for me is why do we seem to just without sort of apathetically collectively agree on, right, we're all fine with the television and now, I don't know, now there's a smartphone, right? And there's some sort of agreement somewhere that that's just fine, come on in. Is there a deeper, so almost metaphysical belief behind this technological change that we're in agreement with, that means we don't sort of question that next iteration? Or is it because we only have the language that technology has up to that point given us? As you said, we're not at the beginning of this. We can't sort of trace its roots right back. We're only ever already caught up in it.
No, that's the question of progress is a really, I guess, again, another difficult question, but it's a really good way of, I think, thinking about some of the paradoxical tendencies the book is tracking, right? On one level, it presents itself as maybe the emperor's new clothes, right? I am saying something about technology that we all somehow know. We're all creeped out by it. We all harbor our suspicions. And therefore, we're not necessarily in agreement that new technologies also mean progress for our own lives or societies or culture. But at the same time, the people we see on these technologies, so I don't know, politicians talking about technology or technologists presenting a new device, they will always use the frame of reference progress, right? The world is becoming better. And in many ways, this is, of course, true. And the book is very much acknowledging this, right? So think of advances in medical technology. A lot of suffering is cured with the help of technology. So on some level, that is, again, true. But he's saying these two stories don't really fit into the same frame of reference. We're not really talking about the same thing. So progress, when it's alluded to in public discourse or politics, it's usually to normalize some sort of new technology and the new social structure it will bring about, which is often new forms of precarity for people living with those technologies. And so we can't really progress almost becomes the word we revert to out of embarrassment because we have no better frame of reference to narrate this, right? And I think obsolescence almost becomes a kind of counter narrative to kind of say, well, we're not just creating progress, we're also creating realities in which the human, as it is conceived, I guess, in Western thought or German thought, as a thinking, feeling I, is rendered pragmatically obsolete or awkward or presented as not good, not fast enough, not good enough. And the text is documenting, I guess, that wider landscape.
So does Anders hold to a concept of the human that has some sort of foundation? Because as you said at the start, for Anders, humans are sort of almost naturally technological. Are we naturally technological creatures? I mean, we wear our current sort of evolutionary iteration would wear clothing and use language. And so where is that split where this process becomes dehumanization? And I guess it's almost like the Heidegger question of when does a technology become that which... what's the split, I guess, between human and unhuman and useful fine technology and
I mean, Anders comes out of a school of thought called philosophical anthropology. So I don't know if you've had featured people like Helmut Plessner or the thought of Helmut Plessner, Max Scheler. These are German, I guess, phenomenologists / philosophers who really take the perspective of evolution, Darwin's evolution, very seriously and say, well, humans are an evolved species. They have specific capacities, chief amongst which is the capacity to make technology. Now, this is something that people were aware of at the time, but even more so since. So I think the oldest tools are 3 million years old. Homo sapiens is 200,000 years old or 300,000. So a relationship to technological objects really shapes our morphology, right? The free hands, the upright stance. So in that sense, we really are a species evolved out of a relationship or along with a relationship with technology. And Anders takes this very seriously. In early writings, he would say, look, there's no one way of being human. As history proves, as all the different cultures prove, there's so many different ways. It's the kind of variation of the form that is specific about humans, not the one specificity. And ironically, saying it's precisely technology that is creating the opposite, right? Technology is turning us into the human. And this might be a nice segue to the final chapter, right? Which is about nuclear weapons, where he's saying, we have a technology that is so powerful that and its use will affect the entire globe and everyone living on it, that really for the first time, we're all one and the same, right? Everyone will be affected. So regardless how different we are amongst each other, it creates this confrontation between nuclear weapons and the human or humanity on the other side. So it's kind of almost saying the more technology evolves, the harder it will be to be different, to kind of escape, to live different modes of life, to kind of have a way of being that this technological system doesn't deem worthwhile.
And that's why he says also in that chapter that we will live in an age with the inability to fear. Now, is that because we're so used to this? Like, this is him focusing on the bomb, that we're so sort of inherent now within the culture. Everyone knows one thing he makes clear is everyone knows what a bomb is, which is a strange idea that we all just not intuitively, we just de facto understand what a bomb is. And so we don't have a fear around our capacity, because he says we also become sort of infinite. We become sort of godlike at this point.
I mean, yeah, these are like some of the core ideas of the final chapter, and it's possibly helpful to start with a bit of context, right? So in late 1940s, after the Second World War, there was this unbridled optimism around this technology. It was really hyped, right? In a similar way to AI is being hyped today. Um, Nuclear technology was presented as the solution to everything, and every problem would be solved with it. And it is in this kind of climate of optimism that Anders writes this chapter, which is, or this very long chapter, it's over 100 pages long. And the full title is On the Bomb and the Roots of Our Apocalypse Blindness or Imperception. He's kind of saying, on some level, we know that this technology has an earth-destroying power, or it can destroy, at least, theoretically, life on Earth. But at the same time, we live as if this isn't happening, right? We're all kind of, oh yeah, that's fine. It's not really our problem. And the essay presents itself as a quest for answers. Why is this so? Why are we not afraid? Why are we not more afraid? What about the nuclear weapons as a technology is creating this curious relationship? And he's basically saying the device is too big. Its power is too vast to comprehend. It exceeds our ability to kind of compute. And I'm using a machine reference to talk about humans, which is not ideal. But at the same time, the way this device comes into being makes it really hard for us to identify who is responsible for its existence, right? He will and I think he's actually here riffing of a Truman speech on the day of Hiroshima, which is a close, where Harry Truman says something like, 100,000 people knew what they made, or were involved in the creation of the bomb, but no one knew what they made, right? The force is so big, it's so secret, everyone just does this small little bit, and yet the outcome is a device that could destroy the world, right? So this is kind of what he means by our kind of inability to comprehend and to fear, right? And he tries to kind of translate this lack of fear into a register that might make us concerned. It's quite a stark, I don't know what your experience of reading it was. It's quite stark, quite powerful.
Yeah, I could say about my experience, but one thing I want to draw on is that he sees that potential for annihilation that makes us all kind of nihilists. Am I right? There's a connection for him between that nihilism, and okay, well, I'll listen to what you have to say about that, but I think that his argument can kind of be inverted, but I think I'd probably be talking on technology, but like for technology at that point.
Yeah, no, I mean, the nihilism point is one of the difficult ideas in that chapter. It comes in several registers. He's kind of trying to look for frames of reference to figure out what this object is, first of all. So it's helpful to maybe think. So first he presents it through the lens of negative theology. He says, we can only say what the bomb is not, right? We can't really describe its essence. We can only say it's not a means to an end, because its end would be the destruction of the world and therefore also destroy the means. So this would be like, this scheme doesn't work, and so forth. And after lots of twists and turns, he arrives at this portrayal of nihilism. And he's here really focusing on, I think, the kind of deep history of nihilism. So not Nietzsche, but previous, the kind of idea that the world could actually be destroyed or should actually be destroyed in these kind of he links it to the incursion of the scientific worldview into a religious worldview, and this kind of notion that everything that gave us values is annihilated and void through science, and how do we reorient ourselves? And she uses this kind of figure to say this is almost like the positive portrayal of what the bomb is, right? It treats everything the same. To the bomb, everything is nature. And yet there is no human being alive, luckily to him, right? He says, luckily, that actually treats the device that way. Because that would be, he's kind of saying the people who wield the bomb aren't able to be as evil as their device or as nihilistic as their device, right? They're still using it within this kind of human world.
So that's where I'd sort of flip it, because it seems to me that the bomb at that point becomes this terminal symbol of technology, in the sense that it's almost a bit of a paradox, because technology is almost saying, look, we have to keep going and maybe get on, because otherwise I could just end myself. Like, this is so it really, I'm leaning there on the nuclear weapons as a deterrent for a lot of fairly negative human behaviors. I mean, wars are still happening, but there is an argument, I think, to be made that at least the notion of full-scale world wars is sort of rendered mute now because of the nuclear bomb. Whether or not that's a good or a bad thing is sort of also up for debate, but it's sort of a symbol of like, okay, if we're going to go back to that way of living, then we'll just pull the plug entirely, which is, yeah, I guess that is nihilistic, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, we can maybe put it this way. I mean, Anders will say that this technology is now with us for good, right? So far in the 70 years of its existence, it hasn't been used again since, or at least not in a kind of a way that it was used as a weapon of war during the Second World War. And there's certainly a lot of people thinking about nuclear deterrence that debate Anders' ideas, and there's quite a wealthy and a rich, that's the right word, a rich literature there. And I think what Anders uses the bomb for is kind of a bit paradoxical, because I think, especially in his later work, it comes to stand in for technology as a whole, from modern technology as a whole, because I think as the most powerful technology in existence, or at least at the time, he presents it as revealing the tendencies of other technologies, right? So it concentrates power by its very existence. Someone can make the decision to use it or not. The idea of a democratic application of nuclear weapons would be absurd, right? You wouldn't want everyone to have a nuclear weapon the way that everyone would have a bomb. That would in itself be the shortest kind of rollout of technology ever. So it's kind of saying, okay, so it is kind of oligarchic, it concentrates power, but at the same time, every decision made about it will affect everyone. So on that level, again, it's very democratic, right? Because it connects, its existence connects us all. Because of the way we relate to it, it's also very hard for us to be concerned about it, right? I don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do with nuclear weapons or about nuclear weapons? Yeah. Because the problem seems remote, much more remote than all the other kind of things that we encounter. So it also sanitizes power, or the operation of power, in new ways, right? So in a sense, I've come to think of the way Anders talks about nuclear weapons almost as a mapping device for this world in which powerful technologies exist and create new social structures and emerge out of social structures. So whether it's nihilistic or not, or how it relates to nihilism, I think it's again an attempt to try and find that language. How could we describe this curious thing that we all see and believe to know, but actually we haven't really got frames of reference to talk about this technology?
So why did that? Why? I'm just interested. Why did that? What was it about that chapter that affected you so much, or the way Anders writes about it that affected you?
I think for me it was one of the harder ones, or probably the hardest one to translate, because like Anders plays a lot with voice, with narrative voice, and there's a slightly different tonality and feel to every chapter. This final chapter has quite a particular kind of it's at once epic in its language, or it uses a lot of kind of pathos. At the same time, it tries to humanize or create some sort of solace. So that was for me a really difficult one to kind of calibrate. And it's probably also one in which Anders' method of thought comes across, or image of technology comes across, quite powerfully. So the essay starts almost as with an allusion to Robinson Crusoe or something like that, right? So if you find yourself on a desert island, on this new island, on this unknown world, how do you start describing it? How do you start mapping it out, right? And he's presenting, I guess, the world created by nuclear weapons is like we've been cast onto this new world and this new island. And he's trying to find the language to kind of describe it or to think it through, which makes, translation difficult because you're, in a sense, as translators, we're always looking for language, the right word.
So we've already been kind of left behind by this world of technology, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I already feel kind of obsolete. Like a lot of the economy, which is really part of technology, let's just be honest. A lot of people are very honest. I mean, David Graeber goes on about this in his book Bullshit Jobs, as per the title, but a lot of people are just sort of enacting what it is to be a human that works. And so there is already a felt transparent obsolescence that is its own technological existential crisis. And this, I think, leads back to just my favorite, the fact it was there and he used this term, so I'm interested in translation here, but cozification, because Anders is so on the money with this, because so many people now, in terms of their meaning, will talk explicitly using the word cozy. We'll talk about what they want to do of an evening, or really the purpose is to be cozy and to cozy max. And we have a serious philosopher here who's got this concept of cozification. And I think it's a hidden nihilism there that comes from this technological world, and that seems to be the phase that we're in that we overlook because it seems good, seems cozy. So I don't know if you could go into cozification.
No, absolutely, and thanks. That's interesting. The feeling of obsolescence, I might start there. I mean, we're certainly told all the time that we're obsolete, right? This has become the way in which, or this has become one of the frames of reference in which, I don't know, AI or any other hype technology is being talked about. And I think that's a really important point to make. I think Anders is describing a world in which humans are being rendered obsolete and made to feel obsolete. He's not necessarily, or I think that's how I read the work, not necessarily saying we are obsolete. He's saying this is the world we're creating. And technologically speaking, we could, technology is still built by human corporations and human endeavor. It could be built in different ways, right? It could be deployed in different ways. It could be contained in different ways that would not create these feelings. So just there's no inherent reason why technology has to become some sort of superhuman entity, right? It could be configured in all sorts of different ways. And I think that's one of the powerful motifs of the text. Is like the irony is it makes us feel this bad, but we're still somehow complicit in making it. And cozification really becomes the concept to try and explain how this works and how this happens. So it's directly linked to alienation, right? The Marxist term of alienation is saying, well, we all live in this alienated world. We all know this. All the effects and phenomena we've talked about fit into this kind of realm. Human life is devalued. We become data points, abstract points. So there must also be something that makes this all digestible in some sense. And this is where this concept of cozification comes in. And I'm really glad you think the word is effective, because this was one of the really hard terms to translate, to come up with.
It's perfect.
Anders uses the word Verbiederung, which is something like, well, I find it really untranslatable, really hard to translate. Bieder means this kind of, the world where everything is nice, the nice wallpaper, the nice kind of quaint 1950s style, this kind of very straight world. He relates it to cutification, making stuff small and cute. And cozification, or the word cozy for me, was the one word that really encapsulated that. And he's saying, well, this is basically the way we encounter technology. So he is at the time talking about the way, for instance, TV personalities address you in your first, it's a German text, right? So in German, there's a polite formula that you use to, when you're interacting with people you don't know, Sie. And then there's the first name terms, which you use with friends and family. And of course, every TV personality will address you in that mode, right? they're talking to you as if you've known them forever. Everything is always very nice, comfortable, exciting. And even though the technological world is making you feel really bad, it's also delivering you this very anesthetic, positive feeling that helps you, I guess, cope, and which you retrieve into. So for him, he's kind of saying Cozification is actually also a variant of alienation, but its function is to conceal alienation from us, or to make it palatable, to kind of persuade us to kind of retreat into that feeling.
Is it also concealing violence? Because the way Anders writes of technology, or the way he approaches it, is as this sort of travelogue, is the way we would approach it, and it often is very sterile. This thing is going to be great, right? What's shown to us is better, progress, optimism, cozy, and yet it's very difficult to sort of like peel back the curtain. So where and how is basically, I guess, the base realities of life, which are more animalistic. So violence, even like dirt, they're like, there's very clinical, clean attitude to the way Anders approaches technology, and it's shown to us that it feels like it's without germs. It feels like it's without anything. Like technology is nothing to do with like mud, right? So that's all concealed. That sort of dirtiness of life is concealed. But Freud, Return of the Repressed, like where's that going? Where's that erupting again? Does Anders comment?
I mean, for Anders, this process of cozification is a form of violence. It's very openly presented as that, right? He's basically saying you are being tricked out of recognizing the reality you find yourself in. You're being tricked into a worldview, a way of viewing the world to which nothing in reality corresponds, right? This place that you're shown, this positive world, these nice people, they don't exist. And the desires they instill in you are desires that are completely unrealistic, in the sense that they literally can't be realized, right? Because they're projections. They belong to this word phantom, right? And so the phantom might be helpful here quickly to just contextualize. He uses this word to talk about broadcast entities. So, for instance, the voice you're hearing of me right now is my phantom, in the sense that it's at once real and artificial, right? I do exist, but the version and the impression of me you'll get is purely carried by this voice. And because through technological means this voice can be edited, recomposed, and transformed into something very pleasing and nice, it's a form of violence, right? It's a form of misrepresentation to make people live in a world in which only these broadcast entities seem to count, right? And so he's talking very much about this desire, or this dream, that we could somehow escape our bodily reality, which is, as you say, muddy, dirty, full of germs, not very glamorous. And we're presented with this other world in which everything is perfect and clean and smooth, and there's no difficulty. And the very fact that we're made to like it, right, is in itself presented as a form of violence, right? So it's not so much, I guess it's a really complicated, and I don't at all want to this is just my take, right? Riffing of our conversation. I'm not offering a guide to Anders' ideas here. But to me, this is like where I really always enjoyed working on the text and working with Anders' ideas, is that it has this kind of diagnostic quality. It describes processes that we know, but at the same time, it's also trying to offer us some sort of solace as reader, some sort of I get you, right? I'm spelling out something you feel probably yourself, and I find that a very kind of humanizing thing.
Not only do we have this relationship with technology that is one of shame, and I guess you could throw guilt in there maybe, but it's sort of masochistic, because in the sense that thing is so clean, and it doesn't have to go to the toilet, and it doesn't have to sweat, but the projection is completely false, of course. But we are telling ourselves at all times we're living in a world, yeah, as you said, that we're imperfect. And it seems like does Anders comment whether or not that's making us unwell? Is there is there an anxiety related to his form of alienation?
Oh yeah, I mean, he calls this a collectively pathological condition. So he's not he's basically saying well, it's presented in the conditional. He kind of says, even though it may be that we are moving into this collectively pathological condition, I think he is presenting it as something that is making us unwell, mainly not because we're somehow changing or somehow watching TV. It's not the medium itself that is inherently presented as bad. It's like the reasons why we do so are presented as bad. So behind technology, even though it's a book very much about technology in which technological objects are the main characters, behind those technologies, we always glimpse at the corporations, the companies, the advertisers, the slogans, the actual human beings who are profiting from other people's misery by the way they're creating their technologies, right? So there's a very real form of pointing out they're tricking us, they're gaslighting us, they're deceiving us, they're promising something that they're not delivering. That is very much running through this text. I think especially in the chapter on broadcast technology, there's a certain, don't be duped by this glitzy.
Yeah, well, he says devices speak in our place. So not only do they tell us what we need, they are sort of speaking for us as to what we need, which we're then listening to, like a recursive phantom that we never sort of acknowledge or consented to suddenly appears, which is sort of, yeah. So now we've just got something speaking for us all the time also.
I mean, I think that's actually a really beautiful scene. It's one of my favorite scenes. It's like the scene, I remember correctly, it's a scene in which he talks about like the way a portable radio is now always like when lovers are outside in the park or walking along a river, they'll have a portable radio and they'll be listening to the program, and to find to each other they'll need this help, right? They need this kind of technology to give them something to talk about, to kind of show them what it means to love, that kind of thing. And this is, I think, what he means by that, right? So that the broadcast world has this strong template function. It's showing us a world we should aspire towards, and a set of behaviors, a set of values. And in a sense, we then repeat these in our private life, or we kind of develop the desires that are kind of lived for us on screen or in the radio. And I think it's in this context that he is starting to say, well, we are really talking the way like technology is talking.
Well, seems so technology is giving us a technological common language. Now my question would be, because I'm always on this at the moment, does that invade our ontology? Because that would be the point where you say, can we? So I always want to ask this in terms of philosophers that seem pessimistic, or just in general, like, what is to be done? Because there's this strange section where all of a sudden I was like, wait, what? Spiritual exercises? But what's to be done? Because I feel like any conscious effort, as we've already said, not listening to the radio, is listening to the radio just in the negative. So is there anything? I probably went, in a panic. Probably I was do this in the last episode as well.
No. I mean, the text very openly presents itself as not having the magic kind of solution to this technological condition. Now, is it invading our ontology? I would say no. I'm speaking from my own perspective here, not necessarily. I mean, Anders is very much saying something inhuman, something ahuman, and something a violence to humans is being done with these technological devices. But it's precisely this violence, I think, is only possible because we are technological beings in that sense, right? Because we inhabit technological worlds and mediated worlds, whether we use a novel to do so or some crane text or a radio. is a different in medium, but not a different in kind for me, right? We're still inhabiting an artificial kind of space. But I think the violence comes from when we ask ourselves why and for whom is this being done? Who is benefiting from this process and this invasion, right?
Who is?
And I mean, the way that Anders is portraying it, he's saying power is being concentrated, right? He has this idea or image of the managers of technology, the managers of the means cosmos, right? He's basically saying behind this infrastructure, there are people who are building this world and making it come into being. So we have a sense that he's very critical of, certainly critical of the states, of the US in the chapter on nuclear weapons. That's clearly the actual powers that hold these weapons are his target. And the proliferation of those technologies is something that he wants to fight. In terms of the TV stuff and the broadcast technologies, I think, again, there we have identifiable culprits, so to speak. So what is to be done? I think, yeah, that's hard, but I think it has to do with this affect of acknowledging this condition and finding some sort of solidarity in it, right? Of giving us a language maybe to describe and to connect to each other again, maybe in modes that are not quite as predetermined or given by those techniques.
And what about Mr. Anders? What about if I want to become obsolete? What if I'm fine?
Right.
What? Well, it seems pretty cozy. I might not have to do anything. And isn't that the ultimate? Isn't that almost an insult to technology in the end? If we are rendered obsolete, I mean, unless it, this is getting into the fantastical realm, so I will admit that. But this is sort of the Star Trek-esque future, right? Where post-scarcity technology is so technological and in abundance that we no longer have to do all the things that initially was built to solve, right? Like all the hoovering stuff. We can just do what we want with all of our days. The utopian ideal. What if that seems to be the end game of obsolescence? Does Anders always say that technology will maybe like pull us back? Because in that framing, what Anders is calling obsolete, a lot of people would say, well, go for it, ramp it up, make me obsolete.
Yeah, totally. No. And I think that figure or various figurations of this image are encountered in the text, right? So we get plenty of examples of portrayals of people or situations where obsolescence is wholeheartedly embraced, right? So he's talking, for instance, about fighter pilots who go into high pressure chambers and centrifuges to learn how to become a new being that can live up to this new technology, right? So this idea that you should somehow disown, this is an actual phrase, disown your organic past life or your organic reality or your corporeal reality is very strongly embedded in the text. So he portrays all sorts of ways in which we try to distance or remake ourselves from the creature we're born as or we might currently be. And the book presents itself as being written to people who have a problem with this, right? So it's not quite clear that this is a rhetorical device, but it's addressing itself to if you're the kind of person who feels uncomfortable with this is the book for you, right? If you're the kind of person who wants to embrace this world, you will find this very annoying. Okay. You'll say, oh, you're trying to moralize my relationship to technology, but it's so good, it's so nice. You're kind of, trying to ruin my fun. So he's not trying to speak to everyone, I think, but I think, it's how seriously do we take it, right? The book has a lot of humor. There is a lot of humor deployed in this kind of portrayal.
Okay. And was I right at the start that this is considered his? It obviously is a collection of other things as well, but is this considered his major work?
Yeah, I would say this is his central work. Yeah. It's his first text, his first major text on technology that is published in this way. So he published a few books prior to this. There were a book on Kafka specifically, a very, very nice book. But this was really the text that established his name. It's an incredibly successful book in German. The German edition is still in print. It's a text that is kind of rediscovered every other decade, kind of in that sense in German. And Anders himself in later works, so he wrote almost 30 books. All of them are collections of essays and diaries. It continuously refers back to the kind of concept ideas that are mapped out in this book. And then the second volume appeared in 1980. So that's 25 years later.
What was the reception like? Did he develop a school? Was there and is there anyone who, was so directly influenced we could call them Andersian?
It's hard to say. I don't think there's any Andersian philosophers out there. I think a lot of the techniques, and especially narrative techniques and ways of thinking about technology, were quite influential at the time. So there's connections to the Frankfurt School, that kind of thing. But Anders was not an academic, right? So he never held a university post. So in a sense, he's writing this from the position, in Germany at least, mainly as an anti-nuclear activist. And a lot of the time, a lot of his other books, he has several other books that are addressed to activists or for activists in this kind of nuclear context. And I think Anders is really being picked up again now. I mean, Christian Dries, my co-editor, has been really instrumental in this, has worked very, very hard to establish Anders again in German-speaking university contexts. And I mean, there's a lot of people I should mention here. And so I think Anders speaks to our current moment in quite a powerful way. So I do hope that there will be not necessarily Andersarian thinkers, because I think this is not necessarily in the spirit of Anders's work. He kind of makes fun a bit of that image as well. But people who will find it useful and might find a language or an access point to certain questions, or this relationship between humans and technology and the emotions it elicits. It's really, I think, also a book about emotion. So yeah, in the English-speaking world, there's lots of people who are interested, and there's growing scholarship on Anders, and the name pops up in all sorts of places that I'm always wow. Okay, so I think it's kind of known, and I guess we really hope that the translation and the existence of the English work will find new readers and new interest.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add about the book you feel is key before we finish up?
No, I mean, just thanks for the chance to talk about the book. And it's always difficult to convey or to translate a long project and a book of this size into this kind of conversation. So I hope I'm doing justice to the ideas. And yeah, thanks.
Okay, well, I'll be sure to put the links for your own site and our previous conversation in the description below, alongside links to The Obsolescence of the Human. So, Chris Müller, it's been great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.